Hey guys, thanks so much to all of you for waiting. I know some of you thought I would be on hours earlier. I did put up a video earlier. It was on a different link to this one, and with the right time, and then unfortunately I do get rid of that one, and so when I updated it, I didn't put the updated time. So anyway, thank you a lot to you guys for your patience. Mary Rose, good to see you. Rhonda Henderson. I didn't get to see CELLMATE Secrets. Obviously, I didn't miss much. Donnie Springer, good to see you. Billy Nomates, good to see you. Rosebud, Silver Bullet. Caroline K from the Outback. What time is it there, Caroline? So good to see you guys. I've made a lot of notes. How many of you guys have watched CELLMATE Secrets? Are there any of you who've actually seen it? Kitty Whitty, hi there. Teresa. Bria, thanks for being here. Thanks for making it. I know it's quite late in France. It's 1 o'clock in the morning where I am. So, and it's pretty cold, as you can see. It's currently going to be below zero tonight, so I've actually covered some of the plants in my garden with netting. Mary Rose says, saw it, unfortunately. Silver Bullet, does he really expect to appeal this? Good question. I don't think he's got a chance, but, you know, he's got nothing else to think about, really. Chat says, not seen it, looks a bit trashy. Bria says, it's all good. We're on the exact same time. It's 1 a.m. here in France. So I really appreciate you being on, Bria. I'm going to try and make this quick. I actually wanted to talk about the Summer Wells case. I wanted to talk about the Derek Chauvin sentencing. I don't know if we're going to get to that because there's a lot to get through. I was actually quite surprised that the CELLMATE Secrets thing was as good as it was. I thought it was a lot better than what I expected, but we'll get to that in a moment. Rosebud, have it recorded to make notes. It wasn't good. Okay. Barbara says, my screen is buffering. Is it normal? Well, I'm not sure. Is anyone else's screen buffering? Billy Nomad says, streaming fine here. Liz Graham, after midnight here, hi from Scotland. Great to see you again. It's unusual for me to be on a Saturday. I don't normally do Saturdays, but there's quite a lot happening on Lifetime. There's also Laurie Vallow that's showing about, I think, an hour from now. The Laurie Vallow Doomsday Mom is showing. So that's something else I also want to cover. I would normally have written a book about such a high-profile case at this time. So I feel a little bit bad that I'm sort of so slow in that respect. I mean, right now I'm working on another book, I'm editing another book, I'm narrating another book, but the other me, the super author, would have been at this point already brought out a book on Laurie Vallow, and part of me feels quite bad about it, but another part of me is trying to not write every month and you know, sort of do other things. And what is quite interesting in the documentary CELLMATE Secrets is how much time is spent talking about the idea of Chris Watts writing a book, Krista, I guess, managing that process of writing, Dylan wanting to write a book, and then Cadel eventually writing a book and then writing another book. So we actually got probably the most airtime Cheryl and Cadel got. I don't know if you noticed that. Most of the story was really her story. So it's like CELLMATE Secrets with someone who wasn't a cellmate, you know. Half Rutter, good to see you. Little Star, happily surprised to catch a live stream. Okay, so, oh, this dog, can you see how he's licking me? Look at this. He always wants full attention when I'm on here. Then he suddenly wants, it's like, I know you're not going to be available for an hour, so now give me attention kind of thing. Louise Odia, hi from Toronto. I presume Toronto's quite warm. Angel Harmony. Colleen Sulik, hi from North Central Texas. Colleen, I take it it's pretty hot where you are. I believe there are heat waves going through America right now, especially Seattle area, especially the north. Bria, what's the weather like in France? Is it as hot in France as it is in other places? I must say it's not, although it's cold where I am, it's not as cold as it can get, definitely not. But touch wood. Gayla Dennison, hello from Sacramento. Rosebud says super hot here in Southeast USA. Yvette Van Schamelhout, Nick, are you going on another trip soon? Those videos were intriguing and fun. I am going on a trip soonish. I'm actually looking forward to trying to do a trip to the States, but we'll have to see how this pandemic unfolds. Although it looks like America is going to be one of the safer countries to travel to. Frankie Pelequin, praying for the families of the collapsed building in Florida. Yeah, that is quite a strange thing happening there. Denise Acker, hi from Ottawa, Canada. Hedy Bell, nice weather here in Scotland. Oh, that's good. Jennifer Dameron, come to Tennessee. Yeah, well, there's a lot happening there. I really would like to talk about the Summer Wells case, stuff that I haven't actually communicated yet, but there's just so much going on at the moment. Bria says, hi, fellow Canadians. Melanie Bielek, probably mispronouncing that. Hi from Buffalo, New York. Paul Morgan Toots, hi from Norwich. Is that Norwich in the UK? If it is, you up late. Janae Ann, so hot in Portland, Oregon. Okay, I believe it's so hot there, that sort of area. Seattle, Washington, so on. Melly Mel, hey from Montreal. Okay, good to see you. Pavel Sirski, hey from Warsaw, Poland. Quite a mixed group. I'm just waiting for us to hit 100, then we can, oh, so it's 105. Okay, so I'm going to get started. Timmy, do you mind if I get started? Timmy, can I get started? He's quite smelly. He definitely needs a bath. Okay, guys, so I've got quite a few notes here. Pages and pages, actually. The first thing that I've written down here is, do you think that Krista Rochella regrets doing this? Do you think she regrets appearing in CELLMATE Secrets? Now, I must say, before I watched it, looking at the comments on Twitter and other places, I sort of had a particular opinion on that, but having watched it, I think I've changed my mind. I think she's loved the attention. I think she really enjoyed the attention. If you've watched CELLMATE Secrets, right at the end, they actually show her being made up. I don't know if you caught that. They show her getting makeup, and she does seem to be enjoying it. And that comes up right at the end of the sort of documentary, where her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, her ex-fiance basically says something like, I think she really enjoyed the attention, and he's not very happy about that. And so I don't know. I first thought that maybe she regrets doing it, but now I don't. I don't think. I think for some people, even sort of, if it's in a context that's maybe questionable, it's nevertheless attention, and so that's what matters. These are all notes I actually made. It's not a lot, though. I made before I watched it, so I'm going to get to the notes I made after. But it's something I saw in the preview where Sherilyn Cadle said Chris Watts' eyes would turn black when he spoke about what happened. Do you think that's true? Do you think, you're looking at me now. Do you think that your eyes can literally turn totally black, almost like an alien. Do you think that that is factually correct? What do you think about that? Greg Brown says life is good. Ian T, she did an interview in the Daily Mail not long ago. That's true. She's done, I think, a couple. So I just want to let you guys know, especially Bria, just so that the mods know this as well. This video is not an attack on anyone. I'm not here to attack anyone. What we're here to do is talk about the documentary, and then also what information came out of that documentary that's sort of insightful. And I kind of made a note here that were there any insights that came out of CELLMATE Secrets? What do you guys think? Like, did any of you watching CELLMATE Secrets go, wow, I didn't know that? Like, wow, I learned something. Tamika. Melanie says no. Mary Rose, no, and no. So I felt that there was quite a big insight that I didn't expect to see. I think because in my mind, I thought CELLMATE Secrets is going to be about the cellmate and about Krista. I thought that was going to be the bulk of the show, and it ended up being more about Cheryl and Cadel, right? And then you got that thing about the oxy, right? That to me was kind of the big reveal, where she said he told me things that he didn't even tell the FBI, but that is like old news going back to like October 2019, I think. I'll verify that in a second. And when we get to that, I'll talk to you about the true crime rocket science part of that narrative, because that's definitely quite an interesting narrative. So that information is quite interesting, but it's certainly not new. It's not. If you know about this case, it's absolutely not new, right? Melly Mel, thanks very much. First time in here, and I want to say thanks everyone for your kindness. We like to be a well-mannered, nice community that focuses on the facts, right? How do the UK get to see it? I'm not sure, Toots, you're going to have to go on to Lifetime to see what the programming's like. I think it's often released there a little bit later on. So I'm going to go to my notes now. These are quite a few notes from just watching it a couple of minutes ago. The first thing that I've written is this the first page? The first thing that I've written is that the best stuff is about Cheryl and Cadel, not Dylan and not Krista. And funnily enough, Dylan is almost like a footnote in the whole story. He makes, if you add the total amount of time that you hear anything from Dylan, it's maybe 5 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. It's Cadel about 80% of the time, Krista maybe 70% of the time, Krista 20% of the time, and then 5% of the time Dylan, and then the rest sort of backstory. And then there's a tiny little bit of acknowledging or mentioning the other YouTube channel. I think you know who we're talking about. Sort of, if you put it all together, it's maybe 1 minute where you actually see him. But it'll be interesting to see how his channel, what happens to his channel based on being associated with this particular show. So CELLMATE Secrets starts. So we almost 15 minutes into this live. Now we're really hitting the discussion. It starts with viewer discretion is advised. This is based on a true story. And there's a little bit of a moment. I know when I sort of saw that, thinking, you know what, it's like a tabloid thing, but people, this is really about real people and real events. And one's got to pause a little bit and let that sink in. That whatever circus is going on around the reality, this something did happen here, and whatever that was pretty tragic, to put it mildly. And what's happening after that is pretty crazy. Just the aftermath to the Watts case is one of the craziest aftermaths I've ever seen. And I think part of that is because there was no trial. And that topic is brought up quite a few times in the documentary, that because there's no trial, there's this uncertainty. And it's within this vacuum of uncertainty that characters like Krista come forward. And to some extent, Cadel, and to some extent, certain channels. In any event, they sort of started off saying the whole thing about the all-American family. You actually hear Krista saying that as a voiceover, they were the all-American family. I think the opening clip is of Shanann doing that Saturday morning video, the one that was half an hour. That's sort of how it starts, right? Rosebud says, now I'm buffering. I don't know if I've set it to like, what do you call it, HD or something. I don't know if that's what's going on, but maybe we must just refresh. Anyway, then some of the very early notes I've got here is that, and I guess they do this, Lifetime does this to hook in the viewer, right? So some of the first things you hear is, I think it's Cheryl and Cadel saying he was possessed, and he was talking way too much of demonic things or something like that. And so this is giving you the sort of titillating idea of what the rest of the episode's going to be about. And it really wasn't. That aspect's not really touched on very heavily. Now, if you've watched some of Krista's appearances on that other YouTube channel, the letters are just saturated with that stuff. It's just all about God and this and that, and basically, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's nonsense. It's trying to pass the buck to something else, like I didn't commit the crime, Satan did, kind of thing. Then also this thing about he didn't like to be called a monster, but he is. I kind of get this weird sense, it's like Krista played Chris Watts, but what about Cadel? Didn't Cadel, did Chris Watts get a certain impression from Cadel that she was going to write a certain kind of story, and then did he? Well, the fact is, I don't think Chris Watts is talking to Cadel today, and I don't think, as soon as she published the book, even before she published the book, I don't think they were talking anymore. The same thing with Krista, or Krista and Chris Watts still talking. So as much as they had this intimate relationship and that they knew one another so well, did they? So right at the beginning of the documentary, and you hear it in the sort of previews as well, Krista says, I'm standing up for Chris Watts, right in the beginning. And that does seem to be her position throughout. She seems to be of the opinion that he was a sideshow or a sidekick in his own crime. And somehow he took a plea deal as part of that somehow he was manipulated by his accessories into taking a plea deal and not even mentioning them. There was a moment during the sentencing on November 19th, where the judge was asked, do you want to say anything? And that was a moment where Chris Watts could have said, you know what, the version that the DA has just given, this version that you did this, you did that, why didn't you just get a divorce? It was coolly calculated, and he did it because he wanted another life. That was his chance to say, well, it's actually not true. I had help or whatever, and he didn't. So one thing that I think is quite interesting is I think certain people thought that this documentary would be all about showing the other side of the narrative. I certainly caught a little bit of that on his channel, on that channel that's been covering this side of things, where he said something about, at last, the truth is going to come out, the other side of the story is going to come out, where Chris Watts didn't act alone, and the the impression I get from watching the documentary was that he did act alone. In other words, from the narrative perspective of the documentary was to say basically what Cadell said, right? Donnie Springer, he never threw NK under the bus. Cleopatra, you should talk about the churches and government regarding residential schools. Bria asks, where are you from, Denise? Gayla, I think Watts viewed Cadell as a mother figure. Yeah, that was also brought up where she said they had kind of like a mother-son relationship, which I think is quite interesting because I don't know if his relationship with his own mother is that great. And I think it's quite interesting how I think Chris Watts did try to manipulate Cadell to some extent because I think Cadell is someone who is a Christian person and where Christianity features in her life. And so they probably had some conversations about that actually went somewhere. But I think he thought he could mislead her in terms of the spiritual side and then what ultimately happened, you know. Mary Rose says the whole Cadell book was him throwing NK under the bus. I don't know if that's true. Does he implicate Cadell does he implicate Kissinger in his book? So let's see what else I've got on this page. So she says something like, he told me things that he didn't tell the FBI. Something that I thought was a little bit strange, just a note I made here. The narrator of CELLMATE Secrets, her name's Angie Harmon, I think. I hope I'm saying that right. I think she's got 330,000 Twitter followers. And while the documentary was showing, she was live tweeting and she was saying, Krista, and Krista got engaged to this guy. And so, I don't know, I just found it a bit weird. While the documentary is actually going on, I sort of felt like the producer or the narrator, the overall narrator of the thing was sort of, it seemed like she was criticizing Krista. And I've actually had that happen to me. I once went on to, I think it's called the Opperman Report. And in the middle of talking about the Madeleine McCann case, I mean, I found out about this later on. In the middle of, he wanted me to talk about Pizzagate and all sorts of conspiracies. And when I didn't, he started criticizing me. It's his show, and he was criticizing me on his show while I was giving the show. And I don't know, I just find something like that is a nice thing to do, right? At least if you're going to interview someone, let them tell their story without undermining them at the same time, you know? I don't know. So let's go to the next page. I must say it's difficult to deal with the subject matter without it seeming like you throwing stones. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to have this sort of shallow commentary where you pointing the finger. I know it's popular on YouTube where people want to hear, look at this and look at that and whatever. But I don't really want it to be about that. One thing I did notice that stuck out at me was Krista's nails. She's got really, really long nails. Did any of you notice that? And I guess that gives you a certain kind of impression of a person. They're not like long, they're like super long, super, super long. So anyway, coming back to my notes, Cadell says, he screamed guilty to me in his body language and his face. And to her credit, she actually said this to him, I think, in her letter, that you screamed guilty to me. So, there was a degree of authenticity between her and him. But, do you think that when she sat with him, she kept saying, I think you're guilty, I think you're a monster, because that's what she thought? Or do you think she nurtured him and other things? Do you think she was genuinely nice to him? Was it a narrative that came out of a genuine exchange, or was it something else, right? So the other thing is that is brought up here, which is a fact, is without a trial, there's a lack of public transparency. And that has led to suspicions. That is, in a weird way, why we all here, right? In a weird way, we all here almost 3 years later, because there wasn't a trial and there's a sense of no closure and a sense of, there are some details we just don't know the truth about. And that's the intriguing part of the Chris Watts case. I think one of the biggest parts that we don't know about is Nicole Kessinger. Who was she really? What is her role, the scale and scope of it? But to some extent, we just don't know what kind of person Chris Watts really is. Who is he really? And, I called the name of my book is, the name of my 9-part book series is Two-Face. And I think it's a simple way of saying something that has been obvious all this time, is that we are, with Chris Watts, we're dealing with a two-face, someone who has two faces, someone who wears a mask, right? But isn't that true of everyone? Isn't that true of all of us? Isn't that true of you and me? Isn't that true just in a general way that we keep a certain part of ourselves private? But even more so if you go into this documentary, Boo says it's 12:28 a.m. here in the UK. Well, it's 1:29 here, so it's even later where I am. So thanks for those of you in Britain who are listening in really late past your bedtimes. Mary Rose says 3-face or more. Patricia Burns, it's not actually him making light of his role. So some people are saying 3 faces or whatever, but it's basically there's the truth of who we are, the absolute truth, the authentic self, who you really are. And then there's the other side, and you can say there 10 masks or 20 masks, but it's basically that other mask is how you present yourself to other people and on social media and so on. But, there's I don't want to say that, and I remember when I was an idealistic young man thinking the way that we need to present ourselves is absolutely honest. Like absolute honesty is the highest way that we can be, but I don't know if it is. Meaning, if you're with someone, you can't necessarily be absolutely honest with them, about everything, about things that you don't like about them, about things that they say that you disagree with, about certain things. You sort of do hold things back. And in one movie, I think it's Interstellar, the robot says something like, absolute honesty isn't advisable with emotional beings. You might think that's funny, but it's nevertheless true. All I'm saying is there's a aspect to having a mask and having your authentic self that is absolutely natural. Because let's face it, in your private life, for example, your sexuality, when you visit the bathroom, just out of human decency and out of just normal how we conduct ourselves, that sort of thing needs to be private, right? So there is a natural requirement that certain parts of your life are private. So I don't want to say that it's absolutely, it's just a criminal that's got a two-face, but it's when that two-facedness goes to an extreme level where part of what's happening in this two-faced thing is hiding behind a crime and hiding behind what was buried at Survey 319. I mean, that's obviously the extreme version of it. And obviously many of us aren't quite as two-faced as that, right? I'm not saying that having these two faces is evil or unnatural or even unhealthy. It's just that although there needs to be a bit of a separation between the private self and the public self, there can nevertheless be congruency and continuity. And to the extent that there is, you're a healthy person, you're a authentic person. And I think to the extent that there's this schism between who we are inside and who we are outside, you're going to have an existential crisis, you're going to perhaps need to tell lies. Coming back to my notes here, something that Krista said early on, and she must be a fairly intelligent person to have gotten a degree as a psychologist. She says, I've never seen a case with a plea agreement and the whole thing wrapped up so quickly. And I think she's got a point. I think that's partly true in the sense of that did happen with the Chris Watts case. It did wrap up unusually quickly. So that commentary is valid, that criticism is true. But it's not, legally speaking, it's not as true as maybe she thinks. She says, I've never seen a case wrap up with a plea agreement this quickly. Well, right up the road from Frederick was Crystal Lee Kenny, right? The mistress of Patrick Frazee, and she got a plea deal, I think, within 2 months. And I think she's already been released from her. I think she ended up getting something like a year and a half in prison. And it's just crazy how people just aren't interested in that case. It's, in some ways, it's 10 times worse. Certainly the mistress in that case is someone to behold. And what we know, she knows what she admitted on camera to the CBI is, it's incredible. And people just simply don't pay attention to it, in part because the media weren't allowed to, because the district attorney wouldn't allow photos and so on. And I think because he wanted the plea deal to go ahead. And the same thing happened with the Watts case. The media had nothing to say couldn't say anything about Nicole Kessinger, and we heard nothing from the district attorney kind of until the sentencing happened, and even that was a surprise because they didn't want to jeopardize the plea deal. And if you remember, between November 6th and November 19th, Cindy Watts kind of made all these appeals to the media. She suddenly woke up and wanted to stop everything from happening. Well, that was what the district attorney was afraid of. So if the plea deal was announced right in the beginning, Cindy and Ronnie and the Watts family probably would have had time to talk sense into their son. I mean, he does regret the plea deal now, doesn't he? So to say that, I've never seen a case with a plea agreement, it's not really that unique. It's unusual, but I mean, as I say, you had it with the Patrick Frazee case. The difference with Patrick Frazee was that he never admitted to what he did, so it wasn't as open and shut. Although he also didn't testify, they didn't bring any witnesses in his defense. That was quite interesting. Then something that I think is kind of just worth pointing out is Krista's mother was going to live with the Manson family. Not just that she was a fan, that she was actually going to stay with them. And I think that says a little bit about Krista in the sense of someone who gets caught up in things, right? And I think her mother wanting to live with the Manson family is a little bit like Krista living with this whole story of the Chris Watts thing. I think there may be some kind of nostalgia even involved in that. And someone on Patreon lives 20 minutes from Krista. We're hoping to see her a little bit later. I think she's having dinner, but we might see her in a couple of minutes. We'll get a little bit of input from her about Krista. I don't want to talk too much about her, rather have someone who's actually, had direct contact say something. Then at about 5 minutes, 44 seconds into the documentary, they talk about kicking around theories in Chris Watts' defense. And all of this is happening on that channel. You all know which one it is. But think about what we're talking about. Someone going onto a YouTube channel defending Chris Watts, saying, you know what, I don't think he did this. And so obviously Chris Watts then wants is sort of being tempted to communicate because someone is saying on social media, I don't think he did this, I think he's innocent. In other words, they are acting as his defense. Now think about what we're talking about. Someone who killed his children and his wife and then blamed his wife for what he did, and now you've got someone actually defending him, right, as a way to keep everything going, to keep the circus going, to keep the viewers coming back. Just think about that. And think about what I said about a two-face. Let's just look at some of your comments. Gayla Dennison, some women are attracted to bad boys. Mary Rose, yeah, I agree. So the voiceover at this point in the documentary, now they've kind of finished with the backstory, they now give the sort of what's happening from this point onwards. And then they say that Krista then had a life-changing union. And you think, okay, so I guess this means with Dylan, because didn't they get engaged and that's changed the rest of her life? But I mean, we know that ultimately her life hasn't changed because she's not even with Dylan anymore. So I don't know. So then we see Dylan at 0638, where he kind of introduces Chris Watts as my brother, my co-author, and he says, I think he met Chris Watts in 2020 on January the 9th, and he'd never heard of Watts. So a fairly uninformed fellow. And they talk about it being against the prison code to say, I didn't really know this, as actually against the prison code to say what you got up to or what got you locked up. So I think you're allowed to say what you're accused of. But it's quite weird that there's a kind of a prison code, and one wonders what that's all about. Is that to prevent the prisoners from getting emotional themselves and being, I don't know, one wonders what that's all about. What I'm going to do now, I've got a lot of pages here to go through, just taken from notes from the documentary. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to read Sherilyn Cadle's letter to Chris Watts on the 14th of March, 2019. Just because I think it's quite interesting how she engaged with him right in the beginning. I'm also going to read Chris Watts' letter to her, right? And this was provided in the documentary. So he writes, hello, Sherilyn. I'm sorry I haven't written you back when you wrote me the first two letters. So I think that means that Sherilyn had written to him 3 times, trying to engage him, right? Repeatedly trying to engage him. And then on the 3rd letter, he responds. And then he says, you have to imagine I'm very skeptical about who I write back. And when I saw you, I started to write. I wanted to write a book. I said no. Sorry, I got that wrong. He says, I'm very skeptical about who I write back. And when I saw you wanted to write a book, I said no. Exclamation mark, right? That kind of reminds me of what he said about Nicole Kessinger in those disputed letters where he said, see ya, that she'd said, see ya, or got ya, exclamation mark in quotes. It's the same kind of thing, way that he writes. So anyway, so she tells him that she wants to write a book, and then he doesn't respond. Now, bear in mind, in March, this is about a month after the second confession, where he spilled the beans to Baumhover, Coda, and Tammy Lee. Remember, I think he had a bad feeling after that. I think he felt played. I think he didn't know that they were going to release that to the public, and then they did. And so now he wanted control over his own story, and he thought he could get that with Sherilyn. Big mistake. But he kind of wanted to answer all of that, and Sherilyn sort of was approaching him at an opportune time, and that's what prompted this letter. Then he said, although this letter you just sent me felt like God was giving me an ultimatum to write you back, I didn't know you asked for a ministry. So that changed my perspective on everything. So I think Chris Watts, there's a part of him that's genuinely, I mean, he's reaching for some kind of guidance, and he feels like he's getting some from God. And so God is basically the common area between Watts and Cadell. And he feels like this is a sign from God. And I think part of that, I think Cadell is sort of, I don't know whether she's running with it or maybe she felt led by God genuinely, I don't know, but that's certainly a way that she gets into his good books, to put it that way. I wish I could move this screen because this screen's in front of that screen. And then he says, maybe I must just do this. He said, when the FBI and CBI spoke to me, I had no idea they were coming. I felt like it was God telling me to clear my wife's name, since so many people were confused about, and then that's the end of the excerpt. But so Chris Watts at this point is functioning on what he thinks God wants him to do. He's not thinking for himself, although he sort of is. He's sort of thinking, does God want me to do this, right? And so he thinks Sherilyn coming up to him is also part of God's plan for his life, kind of thing. And then look how that turned out. Do you think ultimately it was? I mean, what do you guys think of that? Do you think Cadell coming into his life was God's plan for him? Let's just read some of your comments. Was the shadow proven? Teddy Skull, Chris admitted to planning and thinking about the crime for weeks before, so not a moment of insanity. Absolutely. Something that was brought up was Chris fantasizing about what he was going to do to Shanann. And that doesn't surprise me at all. In a premeditated scenario, you might not like the word fantasize, and you might think that is sick or crazy or whatever, but I think it's absolutely par for the course in a premeditated scenario. I think Scott Peterson had the same thing going on. I think right next to, it's like a mirror image, right next to the fantasy of being with, in Scott Peterson's case, Amber Frey, is the fantasy of getting rid of the obstacle to that, right? I think right next to the fantasy of being with Nicole Kessinger, and it is for him, is the fantasy of getting rid of the obstacle to that. And for him, it was, I think the number one target was, hi, Stephanie, good to see you here. I think his number one target was actually Nico. It's quite important to bear that in mind. Chris Watts' number one target was Nico, and I think if he could have gotten rid of Nico and somehow just made Nico disappear, then his family would still be here. I think that's something worth bearing in mind. But then because he couldn't get rid of Nico the way he did, and we'll get to that with the Oxy narrative, which I think is something worth talking about in this documentary. That's certainly of value to discuss. It's something that's not really been discussed in the mainstream media. You don't really see the Oxy part in the mainstream media. It seems like the mainstream media have dismissed that as part of the fluff and nonsense of the Watts case, right? But then he also thought, well, the kids are also, if Shanann's not going to be around, then the kids are also an obstacle. And so it does become a fantasy in a criminal psychology to do what they're doing. In other words, something that you might think of in an unpleasant way, planning this horrible crime, does become kind of a fantasy, because what's the reward at the end of that action? Well, there's the sexual reward, there's the reward of kind of a happily ever after. Do you know what I'm saying? So we're going to speak to Stephanie in a moment, just get some of her comments in a moment, because she's had some direct communication with Krista. I'm also going to ask Stephanie in a moment what Stephanie thinks about that. Do you think that Krista regrets going on to this show? One thing that I think supports the fact that she may regret it is we haven't really heard from Krista. We haven't heard her giving interviews about going on the show. I read an article on Fox News, and then at the end of it, it said, something about Krista refused to comment on the story or something like that. Krista didn't wish to participate in the story. That seems to suggest to me that she may have changed her mind after participating in it. So let's go back to, so I hope you got that, Stephanie. We're going to be engaging with you a little bit later on this. So let's go on to the next page here. I think I've got a letter from Krista. That's what I actually want to show you. It's a letter. It's the first letter Krista writes to Chris Watts, and it was shown fleetingly in the documentary. It was dated Wednesday, May 6th, 2020. And I don't actually know how many times she wrote to him, but this is what she wrote. Dear Chris, I hope it's okay to call you Chris. Please let me know if you rather want to be called Christopher. My name is Krista, however, everyone calls me Chrissy. I've been waiting a long time to write to you, and I hope that you will write back and we can be friends. I'm sure that you have a lot of friends, but I can really use a friend, and maybe you can use a friend too. I want to start off by saying I'm aware of your case, and I'm truly sorry for the loss of your family and all the suffering you may be going through. I won't ask you any questions regarding what happened. However, I'm here if you need a friend and someone to talk to. I'm hoping that we will tell each other that what we tell each other will remain between us. Right, so what do you think of that opening? You know, I'm here for you, I want a friend, and don't worry, everything that's between us is going to remain between us. And then, you know, the next thing she was on OK Magazine, the Daily Mail, and now on this. So, you know, what do you think about that? So before the whole thing even showed, I thought, well, you know, wasn't one or two people played in this thing? And that is actually brought up right at the end of the documentary, of the CELLMATE Secrets documentary. It's actually brought up, you know, Dylan's not very happy, and so on. You can watch it yourself to get that aspect of it. They also showed that the picture that Krista put of herself in her letter, but it's just like one of a lot of fan mail that is getting. So whether you want to point your finger at Krista or anyone else, thousands, if not more, maybe tens of thousands of people wrote to Chris Watts, probably trying to do the same thing. And what are we talking about? Well, isn't it trying to make money or trying to get some benefit out of getting direct access to Chris Watts and then being his mouthpiece, but then also kind of interpreting what they think is the real story, and then getting attention, getting prestige, getting kind of a sense of credibility, I guess, from that, right? A lot of people asked me, you know, would I want to speak to Chris Watts, and what would I ask him, and you know, am I going to speak to him? And I find it a bit of a funny question, because I wouldn't expect him to be honest with me. It would be the same thing with everybody else. I mean, it would be a version, but I think he wouldn't want to talk to me, because if he's read any of my books, he would know what I think of him and what I know and what I've analyzed and what I've said. So I don't think he would want to talk to me. If he approached me and he said, I want you to tell my story, that would be a little bit different. And I certainly wouldn't be opposed to a kind of a thing of, well, provide your version of events and I'll provide it verbatim. But then I also reserve the right to interpret it. And I don't know if he would like that, but certainly what I expected Cadel to do was basically provide his narrative as is. Meanwhile, I don't think she quite did that. also, I think he thought it was going to be a spiritual narrative, and it really wasn't. So what is quite interesting is, so Krista's saying, I'm not going to ask you any questions. Well, I'm sure that suited Chris Watts very well. But interestingly, he passed her on. So for Chris Watts, he sort of thought, what, I don't really, for whatever reason, I don't really want to handle this person. So he gave Krista's letter to Dylan, and then Dylan took it further. And then Dylan immediately said, wow, you said his name 7 times in the letter and mine twice. Quite astute from Dylan. You're writing to me, but everything's about Chris. And so he was actually right in his early things. And then things developed from there. Krista realized, wow, this guy's quite sensitive, I better be careful. And so she had to be careful talking all the time about Chris Watts and trying to show a bit of interest in Dylan. Dylan was apparently doing time from 2007, and then it just says that he studied every scripture in the Bible. So a little bit of information about him. And then I think Krista said, religion is so powerful, there's no way he could have committed these crimes. That's what Krista said. That the religion that she experienced in these letters was convincing to her. So I think in the same way that religion formed a bit of a common ground in a genuine way with Krista and Dylan and Chris Watts, as genuine as I guess you can expect. I think it was also there with Cadel, but perhaps in a somewhat less genuine way. Let's just look at some of your comments. Stephanie, she wrote what she did to get him to write to her, and he still didn't. Stephanie, I'm glad I made it. I enjoy our lives. Okay. Kitty Witty, the only thing with NK I don't get is her looking up Shanann Watts a year earlier. She hadn't even met Chris Watts yet. Kitty, there are some theories on that. One theory is that was from an old work phone, and that phone actually belonged to someone else at the time. Another theory is that Nicole Kessinger was originally working in, I've heard this, I don't know if it's proved, but working in multi-level marketing, so it would be only natural to look up a competitor in the wellness industry. Heather West, thanks a lot for that. Thanks for being up so late. It must be about 1 o'clock in the morning there in the UK. Thanks a lot for that. Cadel says, actually, Christopher is a very good writer. I can kind of agree with that. His writing is pretty clear. It's pretty cohesive in a way. But bear in mind, he probably has, it's not like he's writing off the cuff and then just sends off the letter. I get the feeling that he does this quite meticulously, that he thinks about what he's going to write, writes it down, then rewrites it again, perhaps edits it, and then gets it exactly the way he wants it. Because there are no spelling mistakes, there's no scratching out, and of course he's got all day to write one letter. Bear in mind, Shanann did the same thing when Shanann wrote her love letter. She also wrote a draft and then, changed it. So one would almost get a sense that maybe he was like Shanann in that respect, careful in that way, right? But another way just of comparing it, and I'm not going to do it here, if you want to do it on your own time, compare the letters that Chris Watts wrote to the letters that Dylan wrote to Chrissy. How readable are they? What's the subject of their correspondence? How grammatically sound is Dylan's letters? And then get the sense of which one can you translate to a book? Which one, does that more seamlessly? Ice Queen in Ireland. Oh, you're in Ireland. Okay. Well, people from all over the world. It's quite amazing that what technology allows you to do. Old woman. Wow, what a name. What an avatar. I've just moved to the UK from the States. It's easy to stay up late. Okay. Heather West, up late because my daughter gave me her old PS4, so I've been playing a game. At my age, what game are you playing, Heather? Queenie, I think you are in Australia. Alyssa Hodgkins, hi from the UK. Okay. So I don't know, I get a bit of a funny feeling from Cadel where she says, I just knew Christopher was guilty. And then, when she was talking to him as this mother figure, or she's sort of saying that to him all the time, I know you're guilty, I know you're guilty. Tell me what you did. Or is it more like, I'm sure God forgives you and people understand, I don't know, I think if you are trying to do what, if you're trying to extract a narrative from Chris Watts, you are going to have two faces. You're going to have to be nice to him, just like the investigators were. Just like, don't point the finger to anyone and just say, look, Coda and Lee did the same thing. They were also nice to him. Were they nice to him because they liked him? Were they nice to him because they thought he was a nice guy? Or they were nice to him because they wanted to get something out of him? Well, obviously the latter. And the amazing thing is Watts has fallen for that again and again and again and again. Something that Sherilyn says in the show, now what I find a little bit odd with Sherilyn Cadel is she's got some useful first-hand information from Chris Watts, but I'm not sure if I agree with it. And you might say, well, so what, you weren't there or something like that. How would you know indirectly? But I'll give you an example. She says that he said the DA came there, or the DA came to them. So Raw came to him and offered the plea deal. That's his story. And I know that that's not true because I've got an email with Deputy District Attorney Wren's name on it. It's dated, and it is basically from Chris Watts' defense lawyers saying that they prepared to admit guilt on all charges in exchange for not getting the death penalty. Now, I don't know whether that email that I've seen, I've got a screen grab of it. Those of you who know me know about it. And that email, I think, is dated 26th of August, really, really early on. Somewhere around there, 26th of August, maybe 27th. But very, very early on, one wonders, was that purposefully put on television to mislead us? So in other words, because in a way, I think it makes sense, given what we know, that the DA would approach him and ask for a plea deal, knowing what kind of person he was and that he is an introvert and he would want to avoid trial. But that's another area where I think there's a little bit of uncertainty. That email shows that his defense asked for the plea deal. But I think there's another possibility, and this possibility is quite complicated and goes like this. Weld County don't want this case to go to court. Weld County employs the district attorney, but also the public defenders, right? In other words, the people employed to defend Chris Watts. And so it's in their interest, Weld County's interest, or isn't it in Weld County's interest to nudge the public defenders to say, we need to put this case away, kind of thing. And I've got a feeling Chris Watts may have admitted what he did to his own attorneys. And once that happened, they said, we obviously can't defend you in court on this charge of what you did to your children based on what you've told us. You're going to have to get a different attorney for that to happen. So I just wonder whether it didn't happen like the district attorney went to the defense and said, is there a way that we can get a plea deal here? And then they got that. And then the defense sent the email, and then it looks like it went from that point to the other. But I do think even us having this conversation, even us saying, where did this plea deal, the idea for the plea deal originate? I think the fact that Chris Watts took the plea deal shows that he's not a very smart man. But I think the fact that it was actually carried off is quite clever for whoever did that. And who do you think it benefited to do that? Donnie Springer, Nick, he told his lawyers about his guilt within 2 weeks. Yes, that's true. I don't know if you follow what I'm saying. If he tells his lawyers what he did, they can't represent him in a proper defense, right? They can't say, okay, so he didn't do that. They're not allowed to. So the only way you can do that is if he gets different representation. They may also have said, okay, just tell us what happened, and then he did. Maybe that's also what happened. I mean, he did something like that with the FBI. So, but Nomad says it did when Anadarko were being sold off. Yeah, I mean, that was something that was definitely happening. There was also a lot of politics going on at that time. A lot of people forget that the day that Chris Watts, the plea deal was announced, was the same day that Colorado voted on those setbacks. Those midterms were that exact same day. And I think a lot of the media were watered down and diluted. The amount of media that would have been present in court were now scattered, covering other things like the midterms, right? And I think that was done intentionally. Another question to ask is whether the whole Trent Bolt thing wasn't also by design, someone trying to mislead the public, not just randomly, but actually organized. I don't like to talk in that area because I'd rather talk about what we know for a fact than conspiracies, Then, so that's that's page. Then Sherilyn says he needs the stability of being told. I didn't finish the quote that I was writing here, but I think what I wrote was he needs the stability of being told that it's okay to talk about what he did. And that's something that is probably the worst advice that he can be given. For any criminal, just from a criminal's perspective, any defense lawyer will say, don't talk to anyone except me, but don't talk about what happened. Say the least, say the minimum. A lot of defense attorneys advise their clients not to testify at their own trials. Patrick Frazee didn't. Chris Watts wants to now. O.J. Simpson didn't. And some people who did made a mess. Jodi Arias, Oscar Pistorius, look where they are now. So she says he needs the stability of being told that it's okay to talk about what you did. But it hasn't been good for him. I don't think him talking about what's been happening has created stability in the least. But I think what he needed, he was being given in a sort of artificial way. Talk about what you've done. Oh, I'm sure God will forgive you. It doesn't matter what you've done. There's no unforgivable sin kind of thing. In terms of criminal acts kind of thing. And then that's going to be reassuring. I think he desperately wants to hear that. So, in the same way Chris Watts is telling people what they want to hear, he's also being told what he wants to hear. So Sherilyn visits Watts in April 2019, and bear in mind the timing of that. So she wrote letters to him. He eventually answered in mid-March, and then she eventually visited him in April 2019. And all of this is kind of, he wants to get back at what happened. He feels like he's lost face as a result of that interview with Coda and Lee and it going public. He wants to And he kind of undermines that in a way. He says, stuff I said to her, I never said to the FBI. He's trying to sort of undermine that in a way. Anyway, Cadel says, I was so nervous, I was shaking inside, talking about the first meeting. Shanann was the first girl he ever dated. I think that speaks volumes. If she's the first girl he's ever dated, then meeting someone else is going to be quite exciting. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. A lot of people say, what, why didn't you just get a divorce? Why was Nicole Kessinger such a big deal? Because he'd had so little experience. And besides that, because Shanann was the first girl he dated, he didn't know what being broken up with was like, and he didn't know what to expect from Shanann. Nutgate had just happened. And I think he was fully aware of what he was doing. He was cheating on his pregnant wife. What pregnant woman wouldn't be extremely upset and extremely volatile under those circumstances? He knew it. Something that Cadel also says is that he said the best day of his life was his wedding day. Was it? Do you agree with that? Do you think the best day of his life really was his wedding day? I mean, that's the sort of thing you might say to your mother or to a mother figure, but do you really think the best day of his life was his wedding day? His own parents weren't there. Shanann was upset about the food that his mother was going to provide, because she was, I think, glucose intolerant or something. And so, his own family didn't attend, and I think they were in debt after that wedding day. Do you really think that was the best day of his life? Do you really think he thought about it that way? And so, you've kind of got to ask, so if it wasn't the best day of his life, what was the best day of his life? Well, maybe a day like when they went to the Great Sand Dunes together, maybe that had become his new best day. What do you guys think? So now we're going to get to quite I've thrown some of my notes on the ground. Sorry, guys. So now we're going to get to some quite an interesting area. I found this quite interesting in terms of the documentary. Cadel says, there's a quote, "You're watching a person who has no control over his life anymore." So she's basically saying, she's visiting Watts and has the sense that he's very vulnerable. He's lost everything. He's got no control, right? Meaning he doesn't even have control over his own story. He's lost his freedom. He's totally vulnerable. And then she goes into that situation. What do you think happens? I'm just saying, think about those words and then ultimately what happened. She says, you're watching a person who has no control over his life anymore. And so what is Cadel able to do within that situation? What have YouTubers been able to do within that situation? Now, as I say, the whole thing about the Oxy story, it's presented here as news and something that is part of this documentary. But I posted it on Crime Rocket on October 5th, 2019. So it's a little bit less than a year and a half ago. It's, it's over a year ago. And, I actually contacted Crime Online at the time. I'll give you a little bit of backstory. Camille, as a former corrections officer, I want to say that inmates very often told stories to each other until the story sounded believable. It was like an audience. That makes sense. I mean, that's a really interesting point, that they would test their stories on fellow inmates and then get a sense of what makes sense. I think what I picked up very early on from Chris Watts, especially in the second confession at Dodge Correctional, was that he was talking about, I wasn't in control. And of course, that's a legal standard. I mean, we've got that a little bit with Tamika. Let me just get rid of this dog. Yeah. I'm just struggling a little bit to concentrate while he's licking my hand, and anyway, he's now lying on his bed there. Can you see him? So that's, I think, a better place for him. Okay, so what I picked up during the second confession was him saying, I had no control. I didn't know what I was going to do when I woke up. And so what he's trying to do there is, in a narrative sense, take away the premeditation aspect, the planning aspect, the intentions aspect. He's trying to minimize what he's doing. And by saying he had no control, it's like, I wasn't acting with deliberation. That was all done intentionally, right? And I think he's getting that from, by that time he'd been in prison basically December, January, February, 3 months. And in that time he's gotten a chance to interact with some prisoners, right? Toggle Tran, a regular on Patreon, she says the best day for most people that have children is when their children are born. Okay. Good point. I wonder whether he felt that way. I wonder whether there was a point where he thought that the day that Bella was born was his best day. I wonder if things had ended okay in an alternate universe, and he'd gotten together with Kissinger and she'd given birth to a son. Would that have been his best day? So I contacted Crime Online because what had happened was, at that point, I don't know if you remember, I was blogging every day on Crime Rocket. I was sort of setting myself up as a credible true crime channel, someone who is very current with the news. It was also around the time that Ashley Banfield had fallen away. That actually happened about a year earlier. And so I was trying to set up myself as the most credible Watts channel, right? And it was really using the blog. I wasn't really on YouTube. And then I contacted, sorry about that. Oh. I contacted Crime Online to share with them the fact that Chris Watts had contacted me or left a voice recording for me to put out there about the Oxy, right? And it was within the context of him having contact with Sherilyn Cadle, and then her book coming out and the letters being released to the Daily Mail. The US media didn't really want to touch that at the time. And then these disclosures about Oxy. And then what happened almost immediately, based on the conspiracy theories that were going on, people said, okay, so there's Oxy, who gave him the Oxy? And so some of the early conspiracies were that that his sister, Jamie, who I think is a respiratory therapist, but she's sort of involved in the medical field. One of the first conspiracies was that she'd given him the Oxy in North Carolina. She was like, okay, we're going to do this here, take the Oxy. Another one was that potentially Nicole Atkinson had given it to him. Another one was that his parents could have given it to him, or even her parents, or something like that. And so there were all these conspiracies flying out. And I put a link to all of this current stuff that was going on in a description, something I posted on Crime Rocket. And I actually, while I was using Facebook at that point, I put up a notice just saying, anybody who talks on the subject about like implicating someone else, you're going to be banned from the site. Just taking a no-nonsense approach. Don't implicate anyone else. Chris Watts committed this crime. But it was this ravenous fever of who gave Chris Watts the Oxy. And there was such a furore around this that I think his own parents contacted him and said, you've got to set the record straight on this. It's not fair on your sister. It's not fair on us. you need to set the record straight on this. And in his letter to Cadell, he said, I'm going to go to the grave with this information. I'm not going to say anything more about it. And then he quickly had to make a U-turn on this, because can you imagine if his own parents say, this is unacceptable what you've done, we're not going to visit you in jail, right? And then basically he recorded, first of all, he recorded a statement which was sent to me, and I said, people aren't going to believe that this is from him. I said, you need to record his voice saying where he got the oxy from. And then obviously there were people who didn't believe that either. But he basically said, I got the oxy, it was me, I got it from the basement. And a lot of people didn't know, had no idea what that even meant. So what? Where's the oxy coming from? Well, oxycodone it's oxycodone or OxyContin is the classical treatment for lupus. Now, even lupus sufferers will argue with you and say, no, it's not true. I have lupus and I don't use it. Well, you can Google it and look at what are some of the typical pain relieving drugs used to treat lupus, and oxycodone is one of the obvious ones. And so because I knew the case really well, I contacted Crime Online with this. I thought it would be quite a big scoop in 2019. And the reporter didn't know what I was talking about. She was like, what's this about oxy? And I had to tell her, I said, don't you know about, people being worried about being implicated? I spent like half an hour bringing her up to speed on the Watts case. This is someone from a crime channel. And then between all of that, she was sort of criticizing me, saying something like, why would he come to you? Like, why would Chris Watts come to you? Why would they approach you? Who you? And I felt quite insulted by it, because it was like, don't you know who I am? Don't you know about my work? Don't you know that I've written books? And I kind of got the feeling she had the sneering approach of, you're a freak, you're an oddball, you're one of the crazy people associated with this case. And I got this very clear sneering, snotty, whatever. But I sort of swallowed my pride, and I just sort of said, let's just deal with what the truth is here. And, she said, yeah, but I don't believe you. I just don't believe that he would do it. So I said, well, I can play you the recording. If you don't believe me, I can play you the recording. You can decide for yourself what you believe. And I said, I'm just telling you the story, and you can decide whether you believe it or not, and decide whether you're going to. And then she just kept sort of over and over again saying, but why would he give this to you? And eventually, after about an hour, I just said, listen, I'm pulling this story. You're wasting my time. And then she got really angry and said, you wasted my time for an hour. And you could actually hear her sort of typing in the background. You could sort of hear, that was happening. So she was busy writing the story while I was talking to her. So in the middle of me talking to her, she's actually writing the story. And what I actually needed her to do was first listen to what I'm saying, get an understanding, grasp what I'm saying, get past this thing of, but why would he contact you? And then, once she's figured out what's going on, then put it all together. And eventually I just got so impatient. I was just like, look, just drop it, just leave it. And so it never really made it into the mainstream media, basically until now, right? It's not as though you guys didn't know about it. People have spoken about it on social media, about the oxy side, and it's been a little bit on YouTube. And of course, it's been in Sherilyn Cadell's book. But I mean, I think that is certainly an interesting part of the narrative that comes out in CELLMATE Secrets. The thing is, none of that really had to do with Dylan or Krista. They don't really have any commentary on that, either of them. So that isn't really a CELLMATE Secret story, is it? Beverly Lawyer. Beverly, I don't know if you can hear me. I've been meaning to say this to you for a long time. All your comments are in all caps. Like every single comment you ever leave is in all caps. And you're the only one who does that. Are you able to not do that? Patricia Burns, I have lupus and I would never use Oxy. So that's a comment I've heard a lot. I've heard people say, so it's almost like you're saying, I don't think Shanann had Oxy, right? I don't think Shanann kept Oxy, or maybe Oxy is totally irrelevant to this case. And I guess the only thing I can kind of say to that is, Patricia, you're not Shanann, but I guess you could make the argument. You could say the Oxy didn't happen. It's a lie. It's irrelevant, and all those things. You could do it. But, the Oxy does explain quite a few things. It explains how he tried to go about bringing about a miscarriage, I think twice. We'll come back to that in a moment. Thanks, Beverly. I appreciate that. I have been meaning to say this to you for quite a while, so I'm glad you... Raoul Sharp says Oxy's nickname Poor Man's Heroin in Australia. She had neck surgery, yeah. Thanks, Stephanie, for saying that to Beverly. I did actually mention to Beverly earlier, and then nothing happened, so I wanted to deal with it here. So Patricia says, I think she did not have lupus. I've also heard that argument. I think you're missing the point is she thought she had lupus. So whether you think she didn't have it, I think she thought she did have it. And you might say, no, I actually don't think she did think she had it. Well, if you look at her Twitter account, she was following a lot of lupus foundations. Her family thought she had it. So the reality is everyone thought she had it, whether she had it or not. That was the reality. And if you accept that, then you say, because of that, there was a lot of anxiety about health, about I can't eat this, I can't eat that. And as soon as you say, I don't think she had lupus, you take away that whole narrative that Shanann was justifiably, to some extent, worried. She was justifiably stressed about the pregnancy, more than another woman would be in that situation. She was justifiably stressed about the first child that she would have, or that she could have children at all, right? Stephanie says it's possible there was Oxy in the basement, but they'd have the remaining meds in containers from the basement. I agree with that. That would have come out in a trial, the contents that's in the basement. A lot of people have speculated what is in all those containers in the basement. Some people have said Thrive products, some people have said other MLM products, some people have said medications, but there's a heck of a lot of product in those containers. Then, what did I write here? Her public support of what's on AD drives a wedge between her and her new love. So this is a comment, I think, from a voiceover, and what this is saying is Krista going onto this YouTube channel repeatedly supporting Chris Watts started driving a wedge between Krista and Dylan, meaning Dylan started to not feel very good about Krista going onto Armchair Detective and just talking about Chris Watts the whole time. So he was thinking, I thought you loved me, I thought you in a relationship with me, and yet you're going onto this channel quite often, and you just fixated on Chris Watts, you're just talking about Chris Watts, what about me? And of course, Dylan's a vital link in the chain because Krista can only get to Chris Watts via Dylan, right? So Krista finds out about Chris Watts via Dylan because Chris Watts isn't writing to her directly. Chris Watts can talk to her on the phone when he's in the area when she's speaking to Dylan. So she needs Dylan to be part of this relay. Does that make sense? And I think Chris Watts liked the public support at that point. I think he liked the fact that they are saying that he's innocent. And so that is essentially what was happening with that channel at the time, is that channel was appearing as Chris Watts's de facto defense in lieu of no defense lawyer, right? So Chris Watts's best support was coming from Krista, and Krista had a platform on this particular YouTube channel basically defending a triple murderer, and this channel was giving her all the airtime because, you know, you can now get you can mainline into the Chris Watts story through this. And of course, the story is that he's innocent, right? And of course, this channel is giving you the truth, right? Anyway, Cadel goes on to say that they had a mother-son type relationship. And then she'd say, he's a monster, right? She'd say, our relationship was like a mother-son relationship, and then like in the next moment, he's a monster. That's how I've got it written down here in these notes. So they sort of juxtapose. We've got a mother-son relationship, but he's a monster. And in a weird way, I think that's sort of how Chris Watts saw his own family, in the sense of a father-daughter relationship, father-unborn-son relationship, but he's a monster, and so he gets rid of them. I think there's a weird echo, a weird parallel universe to the way Chris Watts got rid of his family because he wants that, and the way people in the real world have been using the Chris Watts case to get what they want, and also kind of flushing down their own integrity or flushing down their own, just like in a weird way, they are mini Chris Wattses themselves, where you're willing to annihilate a person, someone who's a criminal in this case, in order to get your thing. But I mean, it's not actual annihilation, it's social annihilation. You're going behind his back to say what a monster he is, right? So what I'm trying to say is, if you'd gone to Chris Watts and said, you know what, 5 months from now, I'm going to go on television and tell people what a monster you are, knowing that you don't like that term, do you think he would have wanted to talk to that person, right? And this is the kind of world we're living in. And that's what I'm trying to sort of bring your attention to, is we tend to point the finger and say, Chris Watts is a monster, psychopath, and all these labels. Shanann didn't have lupus, and there's this alternate reality. But if you can't tell the reality of the Watts case, how can you tell the reality of your own life? Just of people who aren't trying to deceive you, or people who are maybe not being totally honest, but they're not being totally transparent. But are you aware of that? Are you aware of these sort of games going on? Are you able to tell the difference between what you want to believe and what's actually happening? Are other people able to tell that with you? Stephanie says, please keep the language clean and refrain from mentioning other channels. On this channel, we don't like to sort of say that person is horrible and that channel is terrible, because it's not. True crime needs to be about true crime, not about bad-mouthing other people, right? And although this episode may feel like that, what we're actually trying to do is address the narrative that's happening in terms of the Chris Watts case, but without getting personal about it, which is quite hard to do given the subject matter. So something that Sharon Cadel said that I really agreed with, was she said he'd never been pursued before. It fed his ego, right? So this is all dealing with Kissinger. And I think that's 100% true. I think it was a massive ego boost to him that Kissinger kind of chose him out of all the other guys in the office. Between all the operators in this male-dominated environment, Kissinger noticed him and felt a certain way towards him, right? I see quite a few people's messages are being deleted, guys. Just keep your language clean, guys. Nikki, I believe he's guilty and he had help. Teresa, looking for what makes people think that they think. Some people become addicted to Oxy, then can't afford it, so they turn to, okay, seen that hundreds of times. Karen Engelhardt, I'm going to admit that it's the accent there, I said it. The accent, what do you mean? Okay. Teresa, you're so right, Nick. We do not have the right to judge, but for the grace of God, walk I. You know, on that whole topic of judgment, they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Well, you should. You should judge a book by its cover and its content. So I think we should judge, but we should be discerning in our judgment. So judge based on knowledge, not ignorance. I don't think it's true to say we shouldn't judge. I mean, don't judge shallowly based on stereotypes, and don't just be judgmental all the time. But you do need to exercise your judgment in terms of your discernment. I prefer the word discernment. I don't think we use our discernment enough. And maybe a reason for that is because people are told don't judge. We should judge, but not judge, discern. Use your discernment, use your knowledge, educate yourself, pay attention. Does that make sense? So he'd never been pursued before, and it fed his ego, and so getting all these messages from Kissinger, and we know the kind of messages they went. You've got a kind of a weird parallel. I think in the same way that his ego was massaged and the sort of content he was getting on his phone from Kissinger, I wonder whether that wasn't the same between Krista and Dylan. That is referenced in CELLMATE Secrets, the kind of letters that they were writing to one another, right? And in that area, Dylan then gets caught up thinking that she really likes him, and it's quite exciting, right? But I think that's kind of a kindergarten 101 way of manipulating a man, is through that way. It's effective, but it's also kind of a shallow way. It's not necessarily genuine. Big sigh from Timmy. How many pages have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages to go. But there's not really much written on each of them, so don't worry too much. So something else that Sherilyn said, Chris uses religion in an attempt to manipulate her. Sorry, I don't think that was Sherilyn's words. I think that was the narrator of the show saying Chris used religion in an attempt to manipulate her. And I think that's true, but I also think it's used the opposite way as well, that other people used religion to try and manipulate him. So I wrote here, she wasn't manipulating him, ? And then he was blaming the dark spirits. It almost worked at times. That's something that Sherilyn said. So Chris Watts is trying to control the narrative, but also recast the narrative where he didn't premeditate, he didn't plan, he didn't have a motive, and all of this was just because of dark spirits. And she says it almost worked. I think it has worked with some people, where people think, I can't understand Chris Watts, this must be diabolical. And wasn't this person involved in the occult and this and that and the next thing? And then they totally get lost from the whole true crime thing. So just a question I've written here. He trusted Cadell to tell his story. Did she? And I think you can answer that in two ways. You can answer that in a sort of naive way and say, Chris Watts trusted Cadell to tell his story. Did she know? But you can also say it from another perspective of, did she tell his story? Well, she did. She told kind of her version of his story, which I think the only thing, let's put it this way, worse than Sherilyn Cadell telling his story the way it is, which I think wouldn't have been a very good book. I'm talking about with all the spiritual nonsense in it. That would have been the worst possible book on this case. It's just, that kind of thing. And we'll see if this book from Chris Watts and Dylan is going to see the light of day, the devotional. Do you think people are going to buy that book? Maybe they will, out of a curiosity value. I mean, Shea Bell wrote books about certain religious topics, and how well did they sell? Something that did come out of CELLMATE Secrets that I thought was somewhat interesting was in terms of like what is his life actually like behind bars? What do we actually learn about the reality? Like what insights do we actually get from the show? Was just a little bit of info about them playing basketball together. And apparently they kind of won the Dodge basketball championship. So Dylan and Chris Watts formed this team, and I think Dylan was a better basketball player. I think he's also younger than Chris Watts. I think he's just a younger guy. And I think he said something about he scored 23 points and Watts scored 11, but they basically won the Dodge basketball championship. I find that whole thing a little bit difficult to imagine, because on the one hand, they're sort of sketching these inmates as their lives are at risk, or certainly Chris Watts' life is at risk, and then the next thing they're playing basketball together. So I don't know, just my analytical mind working over time. Cassia says introverts live in their own world. Stephanie's just put a link to, I think it's the Two-Faced books. Thanks a lot for that. Renee, buyer's remorse. Chris Watts learned a valuable lesson. Keep your... Okay. Teresa Payne. James is at 12. Did you ever think about doing a podcast? James, at this point, I'm narrating audiobooks on Patreon, and it's, after this show, I'm going to be doing a 7-page chapter, and it just chews up my voice. So, I mean, I come close to doing that with my almost daily YouTube videos, and then narrating the chapters on Patreon. On like the $5 tier's got slightly shorter audiobooks, and the $10 tier longer audiobooks. Justine Myers Joyner, I think people hear a story in a different perspective. I don't believe anything he says. Justine, I think it's good to sort of have that mindset of think critically about everything he says, but I do believe some of the things he says. I think, for example, the Oxy narrative makes sense for quite a few reasons. I think there was Oxy in the basement. I think people probably will find this weird to say, but I think he was a gentle murderer, meaning he didn't want to hurt his family when he killed them. And so you say he's a monster, but if you keep that mindset that he's a monster, I'm not saying he's not a monster, but I'm saying the label's not very helpful. So if you take this whole idea of that he wants to commit this crime, he wants to commit the crime, but he doesn't want to hurt them unnecessarily. At the end of it, they're not going to be alive, but he doesn't want to unnecessarily hurt them. And so what's the best way in his mind, his criminal mind, of bringing this about? It's using a sedative, a painkiller. And, his first use of that is with Shanann. That's his original target. And the target isn't actually Shanann, it is Nico, right? And then it escalates from there. So, I think if you want to get the proper story of Chris Watts, you've got to, a lot of people just see it at the end game. They see what happened to Shanann, and it is horrific. And what happened at the well site, and it is horrific. But that's not the whole story. It slowly escalated over time. It started with that Nico's the problem, that Shanann's pregnant and Nico's a problem. How do I get rid of Nico? Shanann doesn't want to terminate her pregnancy, so now what do I do? And so now must he terminate Shanann to get rid of Nico? That's kind of how it progressed, right? And we come afterwards and say, why didn't he just get a divorce? He was trying to. And then he made the decision to take the route that he took. So the whole thing about blaming the dark spirits, I mean, when you look at the phone data review, that wasn't going on at all. He doesn't say, anyway, let's forget about that. I've written here, unaware or don't believe. I think that's a reference to Dylan, that he was either unaware or didn't believe that Chris Watts did commit the crime or something like that. So until the present day, Dylan believes that Chris Watts is innocent and doesn't want to talk about anything. So this is, to me, the huge irony of CELLMATE Secrets. The cellmate. So Chris is not technically the cellmate. Cheryl and Cadel even less so. So the actual cellmate, and this is disclosed right at the end of the documentary, basically says, I don't really want to talk about anything we spoke about. I don't want to, it's kind of private between Chris Watts and me. I'm not going to talk about what he, so you've got this weird honor amongst thieves in a sense where he wants to maintain his friendship, which he thinks is genuine, which he believes is real with Chris Watts. He wants to maintain this thing. Bear in mind, he's probably also said things to Chris Watts about himself. And so he wants to maintain this privacy, this confidentiality. And just think of the irony of that. And then nobody else does. Everyone else wants to talk about what was perhaps confidential and let everyone know. Let's tell the world about it. So this was narrated by Cheryl and Cadel in the documentary, and see what you think about it. I've got my own thoughts. He says, and this is sort of going through the facts of the case from Cadel's perspective. She says that he said that he put Bella and Cece to bed and then waited, and then she sort of refers to something that he said. I don't know whether he said this to her, whether she's just citing the discovery, but she said, I knew that was the last time I was going to put them to bed that night. And I think he even said that on the sermon on the porch, something about it was traumatic, having to put them to bed tonight or whatever, right? Do you think he did? Do you think Chris Watts put his children to bed that night, the night of August 12th? Do you think Bella and Cece were put to bed? Do you think they were sort of bathed and then he put them to bed? Do you think that happened? Good night, Kitty. They had insurance. Barbara, you're right. Oxycodone isn't a good way to induce a miscarriage, and he did fail. So no one's saying that was, and that I think is a good indicator for, not a very clever criminal. He wasn't using a very good system. He was using something that was accessible and available, but I think it shows you're dealing with a fairly clumsy character, and that plays out in the later events here. Stephanie says they may have been unconscious. That's what I think. I think that, so you've got to ask, during the 111-minute conversation with Nicole Kessinger, from 9 o'clock relatively early till 11 o'clock, what was going on with the children? He says he put them to bed. I don't think that's true. If he was talking on the phone with Kessinger for 111 minutes, that you would imagine that would have disturbed them. And also, you can imagine that he didn't want to be disturbed during this 111-minute conversation. You can kind of imagine what happened during that conversation. He can't take the risk of Bella or Cece overhearing him speaking on the phone and then telling Shanann about it. He can't have a risk like that going on. And Kessinger said that she heard the television on loudly in the background. Now, you've also got to wonder what's that all about. If the television's on, the children couldn't have been asleep. I mean, that's even worse. So how do you account for them not being ambulant? And I think the answer is they were sedated at that point. We didn't see them running around on the balcony. If they were sedated at that point, were they in bed sedated or were they somewhere else? And the problem is, when Shanann asked for pictures of the children in bed asleep, he didn't send them to her. And I think he didn't send them to her because they weren't in bed asleep. They may have been in the basement, or they may have just fallen asleep in front of the television, having been sedated, and he just left them there, and he would deal with them later, right? Bear in mind, at this point, he'd already tried to poison Shanann once already on the 31st of July. So doing this again wouldn't have been so out of the ordinary. The next step would be to wait and see what happened. And what would happen, they would pass out. It would be like they were sleeping. And it's possible one of the children turned blue, because that is a classic symptom of opioid overdose. Let me say that again. A classic symptom of opioid overdose is turning blue. It's possible one of the children did. Teresa says the children were light sleepers. Absolutely right. Then a lot of you will say, okay, but there's no evidence of that. If the children were sedated, there's no evidence of it. And then my answer to that is, well, there's no evidence that Shanann was poisoned either, her autopsy. And then you say, so then they won't. The oxycodone thing is a myth. But then Chris Watts says, the reason the oxycodone appears in the medical reports is because I put it there. I put it into her, And so that seems to suggest that we haven't been given access to the full discovery. That makes sense as well. That's something else that the district attorney is keeping close to his chest, and maybe it was part of the plea agreement. So maybe it's, okay, we'll give you the plea agreement, and then there's some deal. We're not going to say this, and we won't say that. And then Chris Watts goes behind their back and mentions this to undermine what they've said. And I think the reason you don't find oxy in the Vallow system or CC system is because opiates break down very, very quickly. Even in a person who's alive, it breaks. That's why it's so effective. It breaks down very, very quickly. And it's not just that. They were in a chemical scenario, and it was very hot, and a lot of time went by. So that's another aspect. But I must say, I found it hard to believe that you're not going to pick something like that up in human hair, right? For example, Shanann's hair, if Shanann was tested. So Donnie says that's wrong. What's wrong? So what she also mentioned, now it's quite hard to know what Sherilyn's thinking and how much is just relating what's in the discovery, but she said after he put Cece and Bella to bed, he had sex with Shanann. I don't believe that happened. I don't believe he spoke to Shanann, and I don't believe that they had sex. And he said that, or she said that, actually I'm not sure if he said this to her or whether she's saying it, but apparently the idea is that he had sex with her to placate her, to manipulate her, right? I just don't think that happened because there's no evidence of that on the bed or the bed sheets. There's usually evidence in that respect, and there wasn't any. Also, the way that Shanann was found, the clothing that she was wearing and so on, I just don't think so. Also, he hadn't slept with her for 6 weeks. And when she wanted to sleep with him in North Carolina, he'd rejected her, and she was quite tearful about that. So why would he do it then? It just doesn't make any sense. He was totally obsessed with Nicole Kessinger, and in that sense, his wife was almost a turn-off, right? Trying to look at some of your comments. Patricia, it happened on that particular day because he did not want to pay the school fees. I think that's part of it, yeah. Justine, I agree, no sex. I think there's some of you who don't agree. Barbara says, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. Were drugs found in the children? No. Cassia, how else could he have been on top of her without her defending herself? Well, quite simple. He could have been on top of her with her facing down, right? He could have been on top of her from behind. And in his very first version, and that's why I say you've got to, when he says something, you don't dismiss all of it and say it's all nonsense. The little fragments that are true. People, when they lie, they try and tell as much of the truth as they possibly can and still lie about the details. So in his very first version that he gave to Coda and Tammy Lee on that Wednesday evening, he said, he came up to Shanann from behind, and Shanann was like on the bed, on Cece's bed, and he came up from behind. But basically, Shanann had her back to him, and she was lying on a sort of an uneven surface, the bed with Cece on it. And I think that part is true, that he did come up to her from behind because he didn't want a confrontation. Okay, I'm just looking at some of your... So Donnie says there's an unfortunate lack of scientific understanding. About what? Corin Engelhard, I haven't been able to reconcile what he says he did to them. I think as a parent, I'm absolutely baffled that a father or mother could end their little lives so easily. Corin, I think if you just imagine it from the perspective of that his addiction to Kessinger wasn't that different to a drug addiction. Drug addicts do operate a little bit like psychopaths. They will do anything for the next hit. And I think Chris Watts in that respect was like that. But I think it's different to say that someone who's addicted in that sense is a psychopath. Any person is capable of being addicted. So if you're addicted to your phone, if you're on your phone constantly and someone's trying to get your attention, your own children, your own husband, your partner's friends, but you're just constantly on your phone, their experience of you is going to be that you are like a psychopath. You just can't give, you just don't care about how they feel, and you just want to do what you want to do. But it doesn't mean you are a psychopath. It just means that is leading to that tendency. And so in a very extreme way, with a lot of other things going on, a lot of serious anxiety, a lot of debt, certain personality dynamics, that is what's driving this behavior. Ice Queen says, great chat, it's late, I'm off to bed. Corin, good point, Stephanie. He'd been separated from them already for over a month. Bear in mind, he was fantasizing about it for quite a long time, right? Donnie, what theory are you talking about? Donna Stone, why did the dogs not hit on the stairs if he pulled her down the stairs in the street? So, Donna, how it works is you only have that odor if someone's lying in that place for like an hour or two, right? I think a lot of people just don't understand that. So you don't have that cadaver odor based on, so someone's just died, and then if you carry them off from that position, it's not going to leave behind cadaver odor. They need to be lying in a particular spot for quite a long time, like an hour at least, right? So cadaver odor isn't telling you where someone has been killed. It might be telling you where the body was left for a while. It could be where they were killed, but in this case, I don't think that's the case. I think there may have been a cadaver trace in the basement because it makes sense that she'd be transferred there temporarily. I think they also found a trace on the steps, on the carpet above the steps, going into the basement, because I think that's where he carried her from there to the garage, right? The other thing that I think is dumbly misrepresented in the Lifetime documentary is you see, and this is quite interesting, because what I find useful with the Lifetime documentaries is it dramatizes things, and then you see why that's not likely. So it's like a lot of people get upset watching it and saying, that's just Lifetime movie bad or whatever. I find it useful because it gives you a dramatic portrayal of why that makes no sense. And this is an example of that, where you actually see the children carried out, Shanann carried out, and Chris Watts is like carrying her sort of like this. Let me just show you, like this, right, in his arms. And I don't think that is how it happened. I think she was dragged by her feet or by her arms, so most of her body was on the ground, and he would need to do that so that she couldn't be seen, and he couldn't be seen doing that, carrying her out from the camera that's there. But there's no sense of that from the makers of this documentary, because they don't think of it. They just want to quickly tell their story and get their tabloid hits kind of thing. They're not really thinking of it from an authentic perspective, right? So let me just come back to what I was saying earlier. You've got Sherilyn Cadle providing this version of events. I don't really know if this is what she believes, but this is what she says on the documentary. She says he puts Bella and Cece to bed and then sleeps with Shanann. Then after he slept with Shanann, he goes to their room after sleeping with Shanann, and then smothers them while Shanann is in the house. So while Shanann is in the house, while she's kind of next door, and I guess she's asleep, and obviously Shanann's still alive. This is the version Cadle is telling on this documentary, and it just beggars belief. It absolutely beggars belief that why on earth would he do something like that with Shanann in the house and alive? It just doesn't make any sense from a criminal psychology perspective. It doesn't make any sense. And then there's this version that they argue. I don't believe that happened either. In this version, after they had sex, after he kills the children, he then argues with Shanann, then he kills the children. And guess what? The argument is about, Shanann says, you're not going to see the kids. If you leave me, you'll never see the kids again. But now apparently he's just killed them. And so he gets upset by that, and then he kills her. It's just, like you sort of wonder, when Lifetime made this, did they watch it back themselves and go, this is actually nonsense. Like what we are saying is actually nonsense. And they don't seem to interrogate their own nonsense. It's left to us to do that. Us, who are, let me put it on to myself. I approach crime online with my analysis. Who are you? Anyway, and then this ends up on Lifetime, and then what can you say about that, eh? So the version is Watts becomes angry, kills Shanann, even though he doesn't want to see his kids anyway. What I did highlight here, which I think is important thing, and I mean it's important to, between all the nonsense and all the rubbish and all the noise, to see some reality. And I think the reality is this, and I've highlighted it here. Can you see that? His primary target was Nico. And the full story is that having Nico was his idea, right? Having Nico was his idea, and then he changed his mind. The other thing that I don't agree with is that it's in this version he kills Shanann in bed, because that means that Shanann is allowed to come upstairs and allowed to talk to him. And what is Shanann going to talk to him about except, did you answer my love letter? What was that alert from on your credit card last night, on Saturday night? Why didn't you return my calls? Because he was actually speaking to Nicole Kessinger while Shanann was trying to tell him that she would be late. Why didn't you return my calls? Well, he doesn't want to have that conversation. Something that Cadle says that he told her, which I think is possible, is where he said that Chris Watts knew how to cut off the jugular vein, right? That if you cut off the jugular vein of a person, I guess on both sides, very suddenly and very quickly and very effectively, then you can lose consciousness very quickly. So I think that's possible, but I think there are other possibilities as well, which is he could have used a plastic bag. He could also have, she had neck surgery, so her neck was quite vulnerable anyway, and he probably would have known that. I think he could also have used a rag soaked in ethanol. And the reason I think that that's a possibility is because he's so familiar with the chemicals used in his workplace. Also, besides having access to these chemicals, what is one of the things he loads into the back of the truck? It's the gas can. The gas can isn't in the truck. The gas can's not in the truck. And so did he use that gas can as part of what he was doing? I think it's definitely worth thinking about. Donna Stone, I have to go now. We'll finish watching tomorrow. Was a good chat. Thanks, Donna. So what Chris Watts is trying to say is that he the murder of Shanann was effective, that he cut off her jugular, and that's why it went the way it did. But if that's true, why didn't he do the same with Bella? If he knew how to effectively do this, why couldn't he do the same with Bella? Then she also talks about drugging Shanann a second time, but she doesn't know when that happened. I'm pretty sure I know when that happened. I think he drugged her on the Friday morning. I think it was August 10th, the morning that she went to North Carolina, Arizona. The morning that she left early with Nicole Atkinson to go to Arizona on that Thrive trip. I think he drugged her as well, because she actually said in a text, it's all in the phone data review, as early as I think 6 a.m. she said something to him like, I'm feeling dizzy. I'm feeling dizzy and I can barely stand. And he said something about maybe you haven't had enough sleep, right? We're getting there. How I feel is Shanann never made it upstairs. At least one of the girls was still alive, or both. When he left that morning, I agree with you. I believe Chris Watts used ethanol. Barbara Henninger, Sandy Beach. Yes, that timing makes sense. Renee says, right, Nick, she felt bad all weekend. Nauseous, yeah. Shane Bria, it must be 3 o'clock in the morning there as well where you are. I know it is where I am. If any of you want to do a super chat, I'm really going beyond the call of duty here in terms of time. You're welcome. I almost finished. I think I've got 1, 2, 3, 5 pages. I'll try and get through them quickly. So Cadel says she's not sure why Shanann didn't fight back. I think it's because he drugged her. But I don't think Shanann was drugged that morning or that night. I think on Friday, yes. But that's not why she didn't fight back. It was the way that he approached her from behind. It was the stealth way he approached her from behind that helped create a situation where she couldn't fight back. Bear in mind, if she's lying on her stomach and he's on her back, it's very difficult to fight back like this, right? I do think he made a mess of the crime, especially of the girls. I think he really made a mess. I think he meant to sedate them in the same way he made a mess with trying to bring about a miscarriage. He made a mess with the way that he tried to kill the girls. I think it's possible Cece died of an overdose. I don't think that happened to Bella, based on that little shadow we've seen. It's possible Bella came to, but she still remained groggy. She wasn't quite sure where she was, and in that respect, he sort of had her under control. The fact that she was slightly aware and awake, but not fully conscious. Little Star says, do you think Shanann had Munchausen by proxy? I've heard that a lot. Wow, Stephanie, I love that, what you've done there. I hope you had a good dinner, Stephanie. And I still need to ask you about Krista. I'll try and get to that quite soon. Thanks a lot, Krista. And yeah, thanks to the guys who've subscribed in the last couple of videos. Welcome to all the new people. I think I've actually set this video to, you can only chat if you're a subscriber. So that may have some influence. So I do think it's possible that Bella woke up subsequently, but he sort of had her under the control that she was very groggy, and then I think he thought he would perhaps do it later. I've never liked that explanation because it doesn't make sense going to the worksite and having to text his colleagues while he's on the way there with a child still awake, and the distress and having to deal with her. But that shadow is a problem for an explanation where you say that that's not the case. Patricia Burns, he was probably working out, so yeah, no, he was definitely strong enough. ZJ, hello all. Wow, ZJ has just joined us now. Liz Graham, can anyone tell me if they saw that shadow, because I didn't see it at all. Kitty Witty, I saw shadows but can't make out what they were. So I deal with the shadows in my very last book of the 12 I've written, in I think a way that surprised some people, may even have disappointed some people. So in the very last book, Post-Truth, I provide my final version of what I think happened. What did I write here? So I think he tried to sedate everyone. He failed with everyone except, I'm speculating, but I think he may not have failed with Cece. You know, if you know Bella's story, she actually said to the babysitter, you know, I'm scared that if I go to sleep, when I wake up, Cece won't wake up. You know, I'm scared that if I go to sleep, Cece won't wake up from her sleep. Do any of you remember that? That's something the babysitter said. So Bella was quite anxious and struggling to sleep. Even the babysitter said it was difficult getting Bella to settle. But I do get the sense that is ultimately what happened to Cece. And I wonder whether the whole Nutgate thing gave Chris Watts an idea. You know, in the same way that Shanann was terrified that a chemical in a nut could do something to Cece. I wonder whether Chris Watts didn't think, that's maybe a useful idea there, or something like that. In other words, use their vulnerability against them. And I mean, some of the things been happening with Chris Watts, use his social vulnerability against him. So I mentioned that I think Bella may have been half conscious if she was sedated. I don't agree with Cadel where she says that he said he was angry. I don't know what you guys think. Cadel was saying that Chris Watts said he was angry and whatever. I don't see that at all. I think he was scared and in love. I think he was motivated by fear of Shanann, fear of confrontation, fear of what Kissinger was going to say, fear of the whole thing, right? And being in love, wanting to repeat. Bear in mind, he had this wonderful honeymoon with Kissinger, and then suddenly that was under threat, and it wasn't going to continue if Shanann got back and if she found out. Subrosa Light, thanks so much. Really appreciate that. Thanks for that, and thanks for your contribution. Thanks for that comment there. But what do you guys think? Do you think that Chris Watts was angry that morning? Bear in mind, when his co-workers saw him, he didn't sound angry or didn't look angry. Do you think he was angry? When you see him walking to and from the truck, do you think he was angry? Melanie Bainel says fear and lust. I agree with that. Sarah Shear, Bella's was anxious. Yeah, Bella was anxious. Black Swan, if he didn't drug Cece at all and gave her nuts. I don't think that he did give her nuts. I think that's quite an interesting counter, is if he did give her nuts, what do you think would have happened? Bambi Main, thanks very much, Bambi. Thanks a lot. Quite an interesting avatar there. You look like kind of some kind of medieval, someone from the Last Kingdom. Let's just read some of your comments. Teresa Payne, you didn't seem angry, just seemed determined. I think Chris Watts looked quite confused and rattled and erratic on the driveway. He wasn't on the driveway once or twice. He was repeatedly going back and forth and around this side of the truck and that side. You kind of get the sense that he knew what he wanted to do, but he didn't know what he was doing. And you get the same impression with Chris Watts doing the polygraph and taking the plea deal and everything else. You know what he wants to do, you know what he wants to achieve, but he doesn't really know how to go about that. Something else just that Cadel mentioned in the documentary, you're probably going to say this is being pedantic or arguing over little details, but she says the thief hatch was 8 inches, or actually 8.5 inches, and you might say that doesn't matter, but it does when you're dealing with the mechanics of getting someone through that space. I think it's important to be accurate about those details and those measurements, because those measurements do matter based on the measurements of Cece and Bella, right? I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail, but that's just something that I noticed as well. And then he said, I've never really understood this question, and it comes up over and over again. Why did he want to separate them from their mother? Why did Chris Watts why did he bury Shanann there and put the children there? I've never really understood that question. Like, to me, it's quite simple. He wanted to use those tanks. There were 2 tanks. He wanted to use those tanks to put the children in. So that was always going to happen. So he was always thinking, I want my family to vanish. I want them to disappear. I want them to literally, be nothing left of them. I want that. But I don't think he's thinking of it in a practical way. He's thinking of it almost in a way of, I just want them to be gone, right? But then that's how he brings it about. And because of that, that's how he's going to get rid of the one. And I apologize because I know this is quite the reality of it is quite troubling, to say the least. But he's trying to get rid of the traces of people, and Shanann isn't going to fit into the oil tank, and that's why she's not in the oil tank. So the whole thing of why did he not keep them together? Well, what was he supposed to do? Go to this well site where the oil tanks and bury them all 3 alongside one another? I don't know. I just find that whole line of questioning weird. I don't know what you guys think. I agree with Stephanie. I do think that he was resenting Shanann towards the end of it, and he was, in the same way he was afraid of confrontation. I think he resented what was happening with his money, that he had to hand his paycheck over. He said as much to Kissinger, that they were housebroke constantly. And I think he just, when you look at the Foundation review and her giving him a hard time about not catching an Uber and where he must park and fix the Vivint and all this kind of thing, you get the sense that she's ordering him around, and although he's not fighting back and he's not sort of countering her, you get a sense that there's a calculated resentment going on there, that he hides away his resentment, that he doesn't, when he's upset, he doesn't say anything. It cooks inside of him. So I think that was certainly there, but the reason he doesn't say anything is he's scared of Shanann. He's scared of her temper. So Rel says he needed to have 100% control of the situation. I agree. He just went about getting control in a really bad way. I think a lot of, and this is a takeout from the Watts case that I think is quite useful to think about, is if you think of it in a very basic way, it's about someone who's very, very anxious about a particular situation. It's someone who's very scared, intimidated, frightened about something that is happening, right? It's a very basic way of looking at it. There's a particular dynamic that's playing out, and this person is feeling worried about it, very, very worried about it, and they've got every reason to be worried. And then how do you take control of that situation? And I did a live, I think last week, about managing your fear. And that is the answer to that question. So you've got this dynamic, it's in place. How do you manage your fear? And Chris Watts managed it very badly. But I think the part that's useful to us is we look into the case and you can say, he managed his fear very badly. This is the situation playing out. He managed it very badly. But then the question is, okay, how do you manage your fear? How do people around you manage their fears? And that's a very useful takeout to take into your life and into your relationships, and ask yourself constantly, how am I managing my fear? Because you might say, it's a really dumb way, you should have just gotten a divorce. Okay, fine. You shouldn't have done that. But are you making smart choices in your situation where you're fearful, or people you know? Because often when you're scared, you compromise. There's a scene in a Star Trek movie where Spock's world is just blown up. And another version of Spock tells Captain Kirk, the way to undermine me is I am emotionally compromised. Bring that to people's attention. So the alternate Spock wants Captain Kirk to undermine his other self in order for a particular thing to happen. So he says, I'm emotionally compromised. Even though everyone thinks I'm an unemotional person, I'm emotionally compromised. And the same applies to us in our lives. When we're fearful, we're emotionally compromised. It was my father's 80th birthday this week, and I had dinner with my family, and my brother's very afraid of coronavirus. And even when he had dinner with us, he had lunch with us, but he was very afraid. He was afraid I was going to infect him and so on and so on. I mean, my father's turning 80. He's been vaccinated once. He's got a much better reason to be cautious. I'm just saying my brother wasn't managing his fear. And, you're going to think this is absurd, and I suppose it is. When we were dishing up food, my brother would walk right around, so instead of walking just past me or just asking me to hand him food, he would walk right behind kind of an island of walls and stuff that is next to the table, and come around the other side where the kitchen is, the kitchen doorway, so that he could avoid walking past me and then get the food that he wanted to scoop into his plate and then walk back around that way. And I'm just using that as an example of someone failing to manage their fear, right? And I think coronavirus is a great example of to say, you can say, well, is our anxiety misplaced? Well, then we mismanaging our fear. Is our anxiety rational? Well, then how should we manage our fear? It's a very important question, and the answer is not so easy. Okay, why did he separate them? Okay, we've dealt with that. So coming back to Cellmate Secrets, what is quite interesting from Krista and from Dylan is they talk about this incident in July 2020, where I think Dylan ended up in solitary confinement, I think, for 2 weeks because they traded personal items, and amongst them were Vaseline with Chris Watts' name on it and underwear that was Chris Watts' as well, which was found in Dylan's cell. And it's interesting that Krista responds on TV saying, "Oh, I just laughed about that." She told the Daily Mail about it and OK Magazine about it. This was sort of a breakthrough moment where everyone heard about her. I don't think it was very funny for them. I don't think it was very funny for Dylan or for Chris Watts. I don't think it was funny being in solitary. It also raises other questions, which I'm not going to go into here, but if you think about it, Vaseline and underwear, where's that taking you? And then at this point, I think the narrator, I'm not sure actually who said this, I think it's the narrator, says he suspects that Krista is exploiting the relationship, meaning Dylan suspects that Krista at this point is exploiting his relationship with Chris Watts. That's what I've highlighted there, right? And looking back, isn't that exactly what happened? Isn't that what happened, that Krista did exploit Dylan's relationship with Chris Watts by ingratiating herself with Dylan? He knows I'm writing books about him. So I just wanted to address this. People have asked, why did I contact Chris Watts? Why haven't I written to him? And I can tell you now, I've never written to Chris Watts. I've had contact with someone from the Watts family, not that I reached out to them, they reached out to me. Just because I'm quite cynical. I'm cynical about being used as an author. I'm cynical about what I'm going to be told. And I know what I want to say. I know what narrative I want to say about. I want to do my true crime analysis without being manipulated or without being, but I wouldn't mind being provided with, someone saying, I'm now ready to tell the truth. I wouldn't mind seeing that, but I just don't believe that that's going to happen. I don't believe it's going to be the truth, and I don't believe it's going to happen. So my perspective was basically, Chris Watts knows I've written books about him. He may have read them. He knows what I think about him. He knows what I think about what happened. And he can contact me if he wants to, and he hasn't. And I think that says it all. If I was Chris Watts, I wouldn't contact me. I'm not here to sing his praises or to do that whole dance that these other creators are doing. I'm here to deal with true crime, do my job, do it honestly, do it transparently, and that's it. I don't really have time for the circus that everyone else wants to be, the sort of double dealing game. I don't have time for that. For some people, it's second nature. For me, it's not. I don't think you can be in true crime and act that way, and I don't think you're going to have much of a reputation. That's just my feeling about it. So my question is, did they ever publish their devotional book? Will it ever be published? Interestingly, Krista is referred to as the other Mary. I think it's quite interesting the way that both Chris Watts and Dylan thought of both Sherilyn and Mary, not Mary, Krista. I think their attitudes to women, how do you think they are today? They are criminals, so they're certainly not the pick of the crop. They're not the most eligible bachelors, but how do you think women have treated them? How do you think they think about women based on everything that's happened? Interestingly, in the show, Krista says, I feel safer with Dylan. She said something like, of all the relationships I've had with men, I feel safer with Dylan, and I think it's God's will or something. But she'd never actually met him. This is all based on through through correspondence. And so once again, you've got this weird thing of, is this real? Are people able to live in the real world? Or do you just make up the reality in a way that benefits yourself? How's that different to what Chris Watts was doing? You commit a crime because you want to live this fairy tale. Something that I brought up just in my own commentary, I said, where's AD? So in this Cellmate Secrets, where is AD? I thought it was going to be quite a lot about him, certainly based on his own cheerleading of the show. I thought there was going to be a lot about him. Something else that was quite an authentic moment was where Cadel apparently asked Chris Watts, and I give her credit for this because I think this was a genuine moment. She said, Chris Watts said, will you let me look after your grandchildren? Like in a hypothetical scenario, would you ever let me babysit your grandchildren? And Cadel said no. And I think that was quite an important reality check for Chris Watts, where he realized she actually doesn't like me or trust me. Right? I think that was and that's probably near the end of their relationship when that question came up. The other thing that I think is quite interesting is the promotional stuff for this show. A lot of what you hear in the promotional stuff is eventually only showed right at the end, like in the last 2-3 minutes. And one of those things is where she talks about this platform that she's on, and then she says, what that need is, I don't know. In other words, Krista was saying, Watts may have used me and it really hurts, but what that need is, I don't know. Well, isn't the need that he wanted to spread the news that is innocent or that is less guilty than he really is? I don't think it's rocket science to say that. What that need is that Chris Watts has communicating. Well, he's trying to communicate a narrative that minimizes his involvement, that helps him. I don't think that's a mystery. And she's a psychologist. I don't know how hard it would be to say, what need does he have that he wants to communicate to the outside world? Well, the need that he's not as guilty as people think, or that he's not as culpable as people think, that he's not as much of a monster as people think. I don't think that's rocket science. I don't think that's very hard to do. So what else have I got here? So what's quite interesting also in the documentary is they sort of gloss over some of the details from Cadel. I'm not going to highlight them here. People will say that I'm jealous or spiteful or something. I think you know what I'm talking about, but they just say Cadel releases the book Letters from Christopher, then updates the book. That's how they frame it. They don't sort of say why exactly there was that second book. I just think that, while we're talking about this, it's all about, you're massaging the information. Well, the show does it as well. After publishing the book, Watts stops communicating with Cadel. Big shock. Cadel says, she'd like it if Chris Watts would still speak to her. Do you think he will? I sort of mentioned here that AD is mentioned in the show right at the last minute, like at the very last point, you sort of see one or two images of AD, and I don't actually know if you ever hear him speaking. I don't know if you actually hear his voice. And then Krista's comments about Nicole Kessinger also left for right at the end. I actually thought that was going to possibly be quite interesting, what Krista says about Nicole Kessinger, but there's virtually nothing in there except her saying that she should have said sorry and asked for help. That's it. There's nothing more than that. I mean, that's it. That's my analysis. I would have liked to have done Summer Wells, but I mean, this has been a lot longer than I thought it would be. It's now 3:30 in the morning. Let me look at some of your comments. Cassia, why should he bother what outside people are thinking of him? I think that's a great question. That's actually a really, really good question. And I think you and a lot of people, and it's not weird to think that way, but I think you're forgetting that he's a human being and that it's very hard, he may know intellectually what he's done, and he may know intellectually that he's going to be in jail for the rest of his life, but that's quite hard to accept day to day, hour by hour, minute by minute, emotionally. You wake up and you're in jail. The next day you're in jail. It's Christmas and you're in jail. It's Easter and you're in jail. It's your birthday and you're in jail. Another year goes by. And part of you knows why and accepts why, but another part of you is resisting that and doesn't want this to be the rest of your life, right? And so his only option is to find some way to change the narrative about him. His only option is to try and change the story. And the only way he can do that is by trying to make it seem like what he did, if you like wave a wand, Expelliarmus, wave a wand, and then suddenly there's a slightly different, everything changes slightly. Oh, it was demonic possession. Oh, that person was involved. Oh, I wasn't in control. Weirdly enough, I think his best defense he hasn't even thought of, which I think was somewhat valid. I don't know if it changes anything, but the Thrive patches, I think, made him very sleep deprived and changed him a little bit. I'm not saying it's the same as being intoxicated, but it certainly would have had an impact. And if he did do a drug test, that could have been potential evidence that he could have used in a defense, but of course he didn't. I think that could be a potential mitigating argument, but for what it's worth, how much it would achieve, I don't know if it would achieve very much. Teresa says, excellent live. Thank you so much. Timmy, you're a good boy. Timmy is over there still. Every now and then I hear a deep sigh from him. It's like, are you still talking? Stephanie, Bria, you are a rock star for being here tonight. Thanks very much. Wow, I've actually forgotten one of the most important things I meant to do. Stephanie, can you tell us what you think? Do you think Krista regrets going on to CELLMATE Secrets? What do you think about that? What do you guys think? So let's get a 1 for yes and a 2 for no. Do you think Krista regrets going on to CELLMATE Secrets? 1 yes, 2 no. Patricia Burns, thanks for your time. Thank you. Stephanie says yes. Stephanie says, I think she does regret it. Most of you are saying no. I'm in two minds about it. I first thought, yes, she regrets it because she's been quite silent now. I mean, has she gone on to this other channel to talk about it? I think that if she had, that would be a sign that she wants to talk about it and that she's happy, but I don't think she has. I don't know what's happening tonight, but, the other side is in the show itself, she does look pretty happy. She does look happy to be talking about what she's talking about. And when they show her being made up, she looks like she's happy, doesn't she? Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about how you know Krista and what you think about? Can you tell us here? Sarah Shear, yes, dude, this is a very considerate and thoughtful forum. I like how you engage the ideas of your listeners and you are exhaustive in your considerations. A nice way to pass the evening. Thanks, Sarah. By the way, do you guys know that Doomsday Mom has been showing on Lifetime, I think, for possibly the past hour and a half? Probably, I think it ended maybe half an hour ago. You have to have personal insight to regret not seeing it from her. Rosebud, I'm watching it now. Rosebud, what did you think of Doomsday Mom? I might be covering that tomorrow. Sarah, I'm not a dog person or an animal person. Okay. Oh, okay. So who have you listened to most, Rosebud, me or the show, Doomsday Mom? It is really, really upsetting. Timmy is smart, asleep in his little basket, okay. Does your brother have OCD or anxiety traits? I think he's got a bit of OCD. If we take part in an athletic event, he's always got to have a certain kind of bar before the time. He definitely is quite OCD. He is quite an anxious guy. I'm definitely more anxious than average, I think, about Corona, but I'm definitely not at the level that he is. But, I'm not trying to point the finger at him. I'm just trying to say one must learn to manage your fear. In terms of everything, you need to manage your fear. So Stephanie says, I'm sure she does, meaning regret going on the show. Stephanie says, Krista lives literally 20 minutes away from me in Connecticut. We connected on Facebook before all this crazy she took part in. She left her job because of lupus flare-up. So I think that's quite interesting as well, is that she had that in common with Shanann, that she also had lupus. But I think what is weird is how she supports Chris Watts, that she literally seems to think Chris Watts is innocent. So what I think is quite sad, quite tragic, is that Krista's mother recently passed away just before Krista made the decision to be part of the show. And so Stephanie says she's jumped from one relationship to the next, definitely looking for a man to fill the void. But basically, what I think happened is that Krista was quite vulnerable when she made the show. And I think she was quite emotionally vulnerable based on what happened to her mother. Stephanie says she's no longer engaged to Dylan and has since been in a relationship with a bodyguard who looked after her during the filming of this. Stephanie says her mom was her best friend. She was in her mid-50s, and Krista, as a young teen, when she lost her mom, suddenly she found comfort in 80s channel. I think that's a whole nother side to it, is Krista finding comfort in kind of social media, getting the, not sure what one wants to call it, some kind of soothing or support or reinforcement through social media. Do you think social media is a good place to get, if someone close to you has died, do you think social media is a good place to get reinforcement, to get sympathy, sympathy I think you can get on social media, but to get, to be sort of counseled and to be healed. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Do you think social media is the place to go to for healing? Beverly says, wish my mom were here. Same here. Christy felt a connection to her mom through that channel. That's true. She made it her mission to honor her mom by pursuing Chris Watts to find answers and justice for others involved. So I think you have this weird psychology actually going on, that Krista did what she did out of kind of love for her mother, right? And I think part of the love for her mother is, her mother's past, and then she has her beliefs also soothing her, and Chris Watts also has those beliefs. And it's quite a weird thing that's going on, isn't it? Stephanie says, Chrissy was vulnerable, and in my opinion, that channel's influence had a huge impact on the choices she made. So I do think you've got to ask the question. It would be interesting if Chrissy could leave a message in the comment. Do you feel bad about what's happened? Do you regret going on to CELLMATE Secrets? It would just be interesting to know that. I think there are some people who are very happy that it happened. The impression I got, and this is probably quite a good note to end on, the impression I got from that channel was that he thought CELLMATE Secrets is going to boost his position that Chris Watts didn't act alone. CELLMATE Secrets is going to boost the narrative that there was some other accessory. And let me ask you, if you've seen CELLMATE Secrets, did you ever get that sense anywhere in that documentary? So in other words, is there any moment anywhere in that documentary that the documentary reinforces that channel's conspiracy theory? In other words, did you ever hear them saying, we think there's an accessory involved and it could be this person or that one? From what I remember, and I watched it like literally an hour or two ago, a couple of hours ago, I watched it just before I did this live. I think Sherilyn Cadle says, he's the monster, he's the only one who did this. So I don't know. I don't know whether he can sort of high-five himself and say the truth is now out there. The truth that he's been trying to, put out there, I don't think that's out there. Is it out there? I don't think it is. In any event, those of you who are here now who believe that there was an accessory involved, or who believe Chris Watts couldn't have acted alone, you should watch my the live stream I did where I deal with that in detail, where I deal with how Chris Watts has been behaving in an independent way, in terms of his fitness journey, but many other things as well, just having an affair as well. I go through that in that live stream. If you're not sure how to find it, I'll provide you the link for that, so let me know in the comments. But I basically debunked that whole myth that he didn't act alone. But are there any of you here who still think that he had help? Because I hope this documentary I hope you've seen how clear it has been in this documentary that narrative doesn't have any legs. Certainly hasn't had enough legs for the CELLMATE Secrets to breathe any fire into it, right? Liz Graham says, I think he acted totally alone. Beverly Lawyer, from what I've heard, I think Watts did everything. Justine Myers. Kitty Whitty, yes, please. Stephanie, he did it all. Okay, so Kitty, I'll put a link in the description. It's actually, if you go to my channel, to the home page on my channel, it's the main video. It's the main sort of, if you go to my YouTube channel homepage, then that's the main video that deals with did he act alone. So Bruce Light, he didn't have help. Kitty Whitty says, don't know, not sure. Barbara Henninger, do you get a lot of money to go on that show? I don't know, I presume you do. Rosebud said that was a great video you made. I actually thought it was important to go to quite a lot of trouble and answer what's ostensibly, to me, a dumb question, but to go to quite a lot of trouble to say, to what extent was Chris Watts capable of acting independently? And I think when you seriously ask that question and you go through different areas of his life, it is quite a fascinating narrative. because I think in some ways he is very naive and is gullible and all that, but there's another part of him that's not. I mean, he was able to get a job, leaving his job as a mechanic, he was able to get a job at Anadarko. Out of all the guys at Anadarko, Kissinger chose him. It must mean that he's capable of something. He was able to mislead or lie for quite a while to Coda, this FBI agent. They actually struggled to get information out of him. It's only when they confronted him with the affair, thanks to Kissinger coming forward and telling them, when they knew this about him, and they were able to say, well, you haven't been telling us the truth, that they were able to crack him in a way. And they didn't crack him totally. It wasn't as though he's ever confessed to everything. He sort of confessed, but then he, tries to get out of it as well. He confesses and tries to wriggle out of it. Sarah Shia, can't believe you read my input. Interesting. I feel relevant. With a damaged SIM card, which never happens because they are protected and so small. Why do you think NK is not hiding something? I think NK is hiding something. She's hiding the scale and scope of their relationship, but in other words, the lurid stuff. But if you want to take it much further than that, are you saying that the entire Justice Department are corrupt or whatever? It's possible that she had a plea deal as well. It's possible that there's something similar to Crystal Kenny. But if you want to take it further and saying that she actually was involved, she was there that night, I don't believe that. I mean, that's why would you want to be with someone? Why would you want to be with someone who was going to do that? What in other words, like, think about it just in a practical way. You're in love with someone. Now, why on earth would you still be in love with that person if you knew that they wanted to do that and that to their own family? Why would you want to start a family with someone like that? People don't seem to think about it that far. Liz Graham. Okay. Well, we're approaching the 3-hour mark and it's 10 to 4 in the morning. I think I need to say goodbye. I hope you guys have found this live interesting. I really didn't think it would be this long. I thought it would be like 1 hour, right? I thought it would be quite a short video. So let's just hear it from you guys. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Helen, is there anyone here from the UK that's still awake? I know it's not quite as late there as it is here. I think is it 2 a.m. in the morning there. Good night, Melanie. Good night, Bria. Thanks a lot for being up this late. I hope I haven't messed up your weekend. Thanks a lot to Lula. Awesome live. Thanks, Rosebud. Thanks, guys. In terms of tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a live at the usual time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Do you want me to talk about Summer Wells? I think we can talk about Summer Wells, quickly talk about the sentence Derek Chauvin got, and then I hope I can talk about the Doomsday Doomsday Mom movie on Lifetime. Hopefully we can talk about that. I don't know how much there'll be on it, but we'll see. But I actually want to talk about Summer Wells tomorrow. So for those interested in that case, it's 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. Good night, guys. Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks to those of you who've subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks again to the moderators. Thanks a lot.